let's talk about leggings. You were asking what the difference was between. So traditionally, these would be known as chaps. So chaps are full length. Chaps can be step-ins. They can be zip up like these are. These are more of a shotgun type of chap. But when you talk about a chap, it's going to be a full length, all the way down to your ankle. So originally, most of the cowboys, especially Texas cowboys, they wore chaps. What happened with Texas cowboys and chaps is, especially in muddy conditions, because everything was unimproved, we didn't have pavement back then, what would happen is the bottom of their chaps would rot off because of mud, because of conditions they were in, outdoors all the time, weather, things like that. So what they would do is they'd cut off the bottom of them, and they'd call them chinks. So chinks, traditionally, were just like chaps, but they were basically half chaps, right? And they didn't have, the original chinks and chaps didn't have all the frills and the fringe, and they had, you can see some stuff that was fancier, but just a good working pair didn't have a lot to them. So that was sort of the history lesson on chinks versus chaps. The other one is the California style chink, which was called an armita. Armita means little armor in Spanish. And armitas, the original armitas, were made out of deer hide or elk hide, and they're very simple. They had a little apron that folded from back to front. Sometimes they'd have a little scallop on them. They wouldn't have all the fringe, and they would barely cover the top of the leg, because deer and elk hides are very small. So you wouldn't be able to get all this leather out of a deer or elk hide. And the mechanism to keep them strapped on generally was a wrap and tie belt. There was no hardware on them. And there'd be like a little rolled button knot that came through the side of the leg to keep the leg flap fastened. So that's where armitas came from. So what you see here and what I build now is an evolved version of more of a fashion statement and also functionality. They still protect your legs and do everything the original chaps and armitas did, but they just look a lot better doing it, I think, right? Oh, yeah. So the difference between armitas and chinks really is not that big of a difference, other than the fact that armitas, for the purposes of this conversation, have a fringe apron, where chinks generally have no fringe on the belt top, and sometimes this is stamped and sometimes this is just chap leather. But they have the same functionality, basically do the same thing, and there's all kinds of different styles. You can go down a rabbit hole with different looks and different patterns and different stamping options and colors and tooling and fringe length. And I like to build everything with super long fringe. That's just been my style because I think it looks cool. I kind of was the first, I guess I was the first internet-based vaquero kind of cowboy buckaroo gear store. And the very first pair of any type of legging that I made was armitas. And armitas wasn't very well known at the time. And I feel like I kind of made it mainstream, this style of chink armitas. So now a lot of people are making them and they're very popular. These I really like because I put a Makati loop in there. So you can just put your lead rope right here through the front. You can do the same thing on these. You just do it through the back belt or the belt on your jeans. He's got a Makati loop on here too. So.
Both have rope patches.
Yeah, so I double up the leather here on the right. So this is a rope patch where when you're dragging a calf or an animal in behind you, you have double the wear, because you're going to be wearing them out a lot, Christian, pretty soon, right? So you're going to want to do this. And it also looks cool. Makes you look like you do something, right?
Once they get dirty, at least.
Yeah, the worst thing is to have a clean pair. You can't have a clean pair. People will call me, well, how do I care for this leather? How do I clean it? I'm like, why would you want to do that?
My very first pair, I just wanted to keep them clean and have them on the wall, but I come from the show world, and he's like, no, you need to get them dirty.
Go out there and roll around in calf scours and blood, and you'll be good.
They're dirty now, but mostly just because they're hanging on the wall and they're dusty.
Most of your chaps are made out of an upholstery type leather, so if you did want to clean it and condition it, you just use upholstery cleaner, leather upholstery cleaner. Yeah. These parts, obviously, this is veg tan. You'll still want to oil this like you would your saddle, but yeah.
Do you think there's a difference in the way that the Armitas feel and wear compared to the Chinks?
I think Armitas are a lot more comfortable from the get-go because you don't have this firmer, unless this is chap leather up here on the belt top. When you have this firmer tooling leather, it's like, you know, breaking in a new pair of boots around your waist. These you can put on from the get-go and forget you have them on because they're so comfortable, right, Valentina? Yeah. Wear them to bed, wear them to the restaurant, drive around town, right?
Do you typically make Armitas heavier leather than Chinks, or vice versa?
Actually, it's the opposite. I usually make Armitas lighter weight.
Oh.
Yeah. And you can make Chinks lighter weight too, but I feel like because Armitas have so much leather in them, because of all the fringe, the apron, the doubling up on here, I like to make them lighter weight. And what I mean lighter weight is just the thickness of the leather. These are a lighter weight leather, but they wear just almost, the integrity of the leather is just almost just the same as a heavier weight pair. Unless you're really, really working, like, and you're out and you're really, really hard on your stuff, this is going to last you just as long in lighter weight leather versus heavier weight. And then the lighter weight versus heavier weight also depends on your location, your climate, if you're riding through brush, a lot of brush. If you're riding through a lot of brush, I probably wouldn't even recommend anything that I build. I would recommend something that's made on what's called an oil tan, which is a lot thicker. It's stiff as a board. It'll stand up in the corner. And I refuse to work with that stuff. So it's really hard to work with. Glue doesn't stick to it. It's not fun. You're cussing it the whole time you're trying to work with it. So, okay.
So why the fringe in the front?
It's just this.
Just the
It's just a style. Yeah. It's just aesthetic. Yeah. Originally, the first ones I made had an apron that folded from back to front, and I did the wrap and tie waist belt, and they were step-ins, so the leg was permanently laced closed, and you'd have to step into them and put them on like a pair of pants. And that is a real pain in the butt because after a while, when you're trying to get out of, you can get into them fast, but when you're trying to get out of them, unless you're double jointed, you got to take your boots off, your spurs off, at least your spurs off to get them off. But there's working cowboys that prefer them that way. I think Martin probably still wears the ones I built him that are built like that.
I heard somebody say that, well, in fact, the guy who bought my truck said that the fringe helps shed water quicker. Is that true, or does he just make that up?
The fringe helps shed water if it's the proper length and it starts at the proper location on your leg. So, if you had these on and the fringe started up here and your kneecap was right here and this broke over, and your boots weren't tall enough, if the fringe wasn't long enough, the water would drip right into the top of your boots, right? Especially if you shotgun your boots, if you wear them outside your pants. So, that's a fact if everything's the proper length.
So
Yeah.
Carlos, maybe you could talk about like some of the, like maybe the reasons behind why you design yours, you know, the way that you do, and you know what the functionality is behind the way that you build them. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. So,
Stuff I've asked you, like, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it that way? And he actually answered.
well, can you ask me some of that
Well,
stuff?
like, why does it? Well, so
I don't have my salesman hat on today, sorry.
so chaps had fringe all the way up, and I felt like my bum didn't stick out the back. And, you know, there was fringe and material coming all the way back here, but his are built the way that it does the cut on the side. Do you want to explain how they're cut and
Oh.
the reasons why they're cut?
I was talking to Christian about this earlier. So this, what she's talking about is this cut right here. If I laid this flat, which is kind of hard to do, this cut right here, she's talking about the fringe coming all the way up to here. If this longer fringe came all the way up to here, when you got in the saddle, you'd be sitting on the fringe, which in my opinion is kind of like toilet paper on your shoe kind of thing again. You don't want to be sitting on your fringe looking like a yahoo. So that's why I cut that out right there, see? So for the most part, you wouldn't be sitting on the fringe when you get in the saddle. And a lot of times these saddles have a higher cantelback too.
Yeah, right.
So more apt to be sitting on the fringe if the fringe started way up here.
And then the other thing we talked about was how do you decide like where you start your fringe and how much, like how do you decide how much solid leather you're gonna have?
Okay, yeah.
Where the fringe comes, right? Like
So-
like when you're sitting in the saddle, how do you want it to fit and what's the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, and that kind of goes along with the lengths that you were asking about, lengths and watershed. So when I build Chaps, I get a list of measurements from you guys, and what I do, or I measure for you, I measure you personally, but one of the measurements that I talk about, or that she's talking about, is the waist to knee measurement. And the reason I want the waist to knee measurement is because that helps me determine how much solid leather to put below the knee before the fringe starts. That's going to help in your case for watershed because the overall length of where the fringe stops. And then the other thing that it really helps with is you want this solid leather below the knee if you're ever working the ground to protect over your knee for dirt on your jeans and then protection over your knee. The other thing it does too is if the fringe started here and I was in the saddle, what would you look like again? A yahoo, because the fringe would go sticking straight out like this. So you want to have that breakover, and this is good knowledge for people that are trying to make chinks. Well, you are making chinks, so you're not trying. But you want to have that breakover of the weight of the leather below the knee so it lays right and fits right and looks right, which is a big thing. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to look like a yahoo.
I'm assuming you gotta get a measurement then right from the middle of the knee to the top of the boot too, or what do you do there?
Or is that just a standard?
That's just a standard. The top of the boot measurements really don't come into play until you're doing Chaps.
Right, Katie's thinking about getting them, and I would imagine if Christian stood up, their difference from knee to foot is probably
Right.
6 to 8 inches.
Right.
So obviously you gotta do something.
So I take overall length measurement.
Okay.
Yep. And then that waist to knee measurement, and then I work things backward from there. Yep.
So is there a buckle on the back always, or snaps, or, clips?
So that would be
You've got fingers getting them off.
That would be an option. That would be the option. A lot of times, the most popular thing is to put buckles.
You mind spinning around for us, please?
Well, I'll do that if my wife approves. You were supposed to say no. Yeah. So in cold climates, arthritis in your hands, you don't want these clips. They're faster to do up, but they're a real pain to get off. Yeah. These are a little bit harder to do up initially, especially if you're trying to set land speed records with the buckles. But the one thing you can do before you put them on, here, I'll show you.
So what's on the back there? There's a regular buckle again on the waist?
Yeah, there's a buckle at the waist. Here, I'll show you this though. What you can do, just start them, especially if you have flexibility issues and you can't bend around and do it, just start them. Just start them in the loosest hole and then step into them and then tighten them up. And the other thing with the waist buckle, I see a lot of people have trouble with it too, trying to get it done up. I always put it on the left side. What you can do is you can put it on this way, loose, rotate them around, and then tighten them up. And they're really fast to get out of too. The other thing too is I like to just put 2 straps on the leg. A lot of people will put 3. I just don't feel like it's necessary, because all you're doing is trying to hold this up around your leg. It doesn't need to have 3 buckles. It's just not necessary, and it's a lot easier to get into and get out of.
And then there's the part like where it goes past the buckle, so when you're in the saddle, it gives you, there's a little bit of room.
Oh yeah, so and we talked about this too, Christian. The cut of the pattern in here, I shouldn't have taken them off, but I like to make sure that I have plenty of solid leather behind the leg. So I like to have this lined up as best I can parallel with the seam on your jeans, and then have this solid leather come in a little bit more built in behind this leg plate before the fringe starts, so you have more protection behind the leg.
So there's some chinks that I've seen like in versatility ranch horse in the show pen or whatever, and you look at them and they're really not like functional for being out there and really doing something. They might cover just a little bit of the leg and they look cute, they're fine, whatever. But his style and his design, because most of his clients are working cowboys, there's a purpose behind how he builds them. So
Tim was
you
asking-
are out in the rain or you are out in the weather or whatever, they're gonna work better.
Tim was asking about the water, like you mentioned, the shed. I mean, I'm more like earlier when Carlos said, you guys probably don't ride the rain a lot. Well, I didn't say, speak for yourself. Shit,
Yeah.
I've rained a lot this summer. But I've ridden, got poured on it for half a day, and my jeans are dry.
Yeah.
Very dry. A little bit here, a little bit down there. As long as I have a raincoat that goes kind of past my bottom of my waist here, I'm pretty dang dry all day. When I'm wearing it, because he's holding it like this, just so you know. And even the jigs too, but especially the armies, they're just a little longer. Well, I guess the armies aren't necessarily longer, just stuff like the leather.
That's the other. Oh, that's what I was going to mention is the first design of the Armitas. I used to have, like I said, I had a fringe apron that folded from back to front, and I started making them this way because it was most my customers are ladies, and it's a lot more flattering according to customers. I'm not saying this is my preference, but to have this flat across here and sewn down.